Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So, Labor Day is coming up, the new fiscal year or school year, whatever people call it, and a lot of people, I understand, think about their career and their life and their jobs in August and start looking for something new in September. And so, I thought it'd be really good to check in with an executive recruiter who I have a lot of time and respect for. Sharon Mah-Gin is her name. She's someone that I've interacted with over the years. She has been in executive search since 1996, and until 2002, she was a client partner in the Toronto office of Korn Ferry International, the world's largest publicly traded executive search firm. During her time with Korn Ferry, she led the following practice areas: healthcare, professional services, industrial, consumer, and retail. She now runs her own firm and her own executive search. And so I think it'd be interesting to hear what she has to say. One of the topics she posted about recently was building a personal brand. So let's start with that, Sharon. How do you build a personal brand?
Okay. The key thing in terms of building a personal brand is, I'd say there's three key criteria in it. And that is, it has to be positive, relevant, and unique. And since we're talking about job search,
positive, relevant, and unique.
Correct. That's really critical. And since we're talking about job search, you're absolutely right, Brian. Come the fall, we usually get the calls, rethinking about my career, et cetera, et cetera. Then in the wintertime at Christmas, it quiets down. And then January, you get another slot of emails of people looking for jobs because new companies have new budgets, their bonuses are being paid out, et cetera. So this is very timely, actually, that you're doing this. I often tell people, if they've lost their job, like, just take the summer off. Just enjoy your summer, start again in the fall. So when you're building your personal brand, it's really important that you have to differentiate yourself. So for example, Brian, you've got a CFO background, so when you're doing CFO searches, right? Many CFOs out there. So what makes you positive, relevant, and unique for that particular role? It could be people leadership. It could be, I often tie it to, how do you help people make money? How do you help companies make money, save money, or help solve an issue? Make money,
Save money, or solve an issue.
Correct.
That's how you become relevant.
Yes.
Okay. And unique. You know, there's a whole bunch of people out there with MBAs and CPAs and things like that. How do you become unique?
Well, the way you would do that is, for example, say for a CFO, because you and I are both CPAs, CAs, and when we're doing a CFO search, for example, we get lots of people who come forward for these roles because they're fairly senior. And one of the things that we always look for first is how they are able to articulate their background and how it's relevant for that particular role in terms of how they can help that company in that industry make money, save money, or help solve an issue. So for example, if it was a tech search, a CFO for a publicly traded company, right? What's positive, relevant, and unique here? Positive would be the fact that I've helped companies save $20 million in cost savings, or I've helped raise the $100 million, which, Brian, you've done, I know, in your career. And what would be relevant if in that search it was a growth CFO role, I'm looking for public company, dealing with analysts, raising money, M&A. So that's relevant. And then what's going to be unique will be what I describe as the right cultural fit. Whenever we're filling a senior level search or in any particular role, cultural fit should be number one. Skills should be number two. And then the third piece will be the compensation. If you get number one and number two right, the compensation just flows naturally because both sides will want it. Fit, so that unique part is tying into cultural fit.
That's really interesting that you say cultural fit is that critically important. How do you assess cultural fit as a recruiter?
Well, I like to say that executive recruiting is more of an art than a science. Obviously, when we start our initial dialogue in the market looking for, say, a CFO role or VP finance or director of finance, because, you know, I'm talking any finance type role. When we're looking at that, when we're looking at fit, it might be high energy. It might be how they communicate. It might be people leadership skills. And it really depends on the type of company. You have owner-operated businesses. You have publicly traded companies. You have companies that are in between, SME companies, right? And I have to tell you that for me, I know that that's one of my superpowers, is the ability to assess fit. Usually I lead by fit first, and I present, say, 3 to 5 candidates, and usually there's a hire. Right. And part of it is intuition for me, to be frank with you. But if you want to break it down for someone who may not be as highly intuitive, I would really say that we interview a lot of the key stakeholders before we start a search. So you very quickly can ascertain from that fit.
Get a sense of what the culture is already.
You got it. An owner operated business, for example, I recently did a search, 3rd generation. I mean, a little bit resistant to change, right? So I need someone that can be a little bit more patient. They're going to come in with all the best ideas and do it like try to implement in that first year is probably the wrong fit, right?
It's interesting. The cultural fit is so critical for you.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people would have thought that, skills and compensation are the key things that they're looking for.
Brian, absolutely not. Fit is number one. I can give you numerous examples where I did a search for a mining company, for example, a finance search. And I said, here are 2 candidates who have mining experience. The third one, 0. Let me be clear, 0. But what they have is, the right cultural fit. And sure enough, I always tell my clients, that's my underdog, my dark horse. Here's the 2 you think you want. Here's a third who has everything you want, but doesn't have the industry experience. And when I do that, my underdog, usually gets the role. Their career takes right off.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah. So the industry experience becomes less important. It's the skills and the cultural fit.
Absolutely. Culture fit being number one.
That's interesting. I had a job once working for Jim Pattison of the Jim Pattison Group, a self-made billionaire and one of the richest people in Canada. And he would take people out for dinner, and he would often want to meet their partner or their spouse.
Correct.
And it was interesting because he said that until he met their partner or spouse, he didn't know what they were all about. And he wanted to have dinner because he said, it's he called it the airport terminal stranded test. That if I get stranded in a snowstorm in some airport lounge, I wanted to make sure that this person was someone who I would not only be able to talk to, but would want to talk to. And I thought that was interesting that he really, wanted people that he could have a conversation with, because he said, if you can't have a conversation with them, you're never going to be able to get the right information from them about what they're thinking about, how they analyze things, what they think we should be doing.
So Brian, you hit it right on. That's cultural fit. That's assessing cultural fit. Because, obviously when we do interviews, I often encourage my clients to go have a meal, whether it be lunch or a dinner, sometimes with or without the spouses, for the very same reason, right? Because you can't really separate the personal and the professional. You will look at a whole person, especially in senior leadership roles. So that's exactly what Jim was doing.
Now, is that something that you as the recruiter should be doing? Or is that something that the interviewee, the candidate, needs to question in the interview process?
We usually do that as one of the last steps in a process. Like if, the candidate's going forward, and that we're getting ready to make an offer, our last meeting, we usually suggest not me, but the client and the candidate have a meal. It works for both sides, right, Brian? Because you want the right cultural fit for both sides. The candidate needs to feel comfortable too.
I saw that you recently did an interview with I think it's Andrea Wojcicki.
Dr. Andrea Wojcicki, yes.
And you talked about this personal branding issue, and you talked about the mindset of successful job seekers, the common mistakes to absorb, and the power of leaning into your personal brand. Let's start with the third one. What's leaning into a personal brand? What do you mean by that?
Well, it sort of ties into what we talked about earlier about you being positive, relevant, and unique, right, in your brand. So really not going in there and what makes you different? Like, why should I hire Brian Crombie for this role? Like, what makes?
Come on, isn't it obvious?
Yes, of course it is. Besides your personal charm, absolutely, it's obvious. But and what I mean by that is that you get some candidates who don't go in there and really sell themselves. They don't answer the questions. They don't talk about how did you help a company make money, save money, or help solve an issue. I can't tell you how many conversations, practically every time I do an interview, I will have to coach or have a candidate redo their resume. I'm working on a board search right now. And even at that level, I've had them rework their board bios. So I said, this is not coming out. Why are you not talking about that? It could be something as simple as I had a salesperson one day and I was interviewing him. And I said, you have talked to me for almost 40 minutes telling me that you're a salesperson. And do you know on your LinkedIn and on your resume, you don't have the word sales in there at all. And he was shocked. Like, you know what I mean? Like he didn't know what his personal brand was.
I'm surprised how many people actually don't go back and looked at either their resume or their LinkedIn profile to see if it's consistent with what they're currently pitching themselves as.
Right. And that is one of the things that I can't tell you, people in my field, executive search, that's sort of one of the things that we're always frustrated with is when someone's trying to articulate. So I'm going, but okay, so what? You led 100 people. So what? Like, what does that mean? Did you coach and mentor a few of them? You saved some money. You increased efficiencies. So what? Like, there's no branding there. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. So I often say that when you do a resume, you should always, after every key bullet point you have, you say to yourself, so what? And you try to answer that in terms of how do I make money, save money, or help solve an issue. So it's really leaning in and helping us really understand what your brand is. If you want to look at LinkedIn, you got to make sure you have keywords in your LinkedIn bio that you get picked up. Like, you know what I mean? Like that one gentleman didn't have the word sales. And I said, you'll never be found for a sales role because you don't have the word sales in it, right? But if you're a true CFO, external facing public company, you want to make sure you have M&A, capital raising, dealing with analysts, public company. You want to make sure those keywords are in your LinkedIn. And I'm shocked at how often people don't realize that.
We're chatting tonight with Sharon Mah-Gin, executive search specialist and expert. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Sharon. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's interesting and a pleasure to chat tonight with Sharon Mah-Gin, an executive search consultant, specialist, expert. She's worked for numerous different years with Korn Ferry, and she's now running her own executive search company. Sharon, we were talking just before the break about personal branding, and then we also talked about the power of leaning into the personal brand, which I find kind of interesting. One of the other things that you said recently is that you have to have the mindset of successful job seekers. What's the mindset of professional job seekers? Isn't it just I want to find a new job? Isn't that the mindset? Is it more than that?
It is. It is. You know, the best candidates, I'll be honest with you, Brian, are candidates who are confident but not arrogant. They're humble, they're articulate, they can really talk about their background. And so sometimes we get job seekers who don't know what it is they're looking for. Like, well, what is it you're looking for? And they're unable to articulate that. So when I talk about, the positive job mindset, I'm also talking about people want to help you. Make it easy for them to help you. It goes back to that personal branding statement. So if you're going to meet somebody, what is your elevator pitch? What is your headline? So that people will always think of you. So like I think of Brian Crombie, CFO, healthcare, capital raising, success. I mean, you worked for Eugene Melnick, etc. And now you're doing what you're doing now. Like, you know what I mean? You're entrepreneurial, you do, contract roles, you're doing this podcast, you've developed your own personal brand.
I'm actually the chief operating officer for a real estate development company now. I don't know if you know that, Sharon.
No, I didn't know that. Sorry. Okay. I knew that you were doing some consulting the last time we spoke. So I apologize. I didn't realize that. So there you go. But you've changed your brand. You're a COO. You're not a CFO anymore.
Yeah.
Right? You've changed your personal brand.
No question.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you. So you've got to have this right mindset, which is confident but not arrogant and humble.
Yes. And the ability to articulate your personal brand so that it's clear what it is that you're looking for and where your greatest strengths can be utilized in a role.
You also mentioned that there's some common mistakes to avoid. What are those common mistakes that need to be avoided?
When one is job seeking?
Yes.
Absolutely. Number one that I always talk about is please be clear and concise in terms of what it is that you're looking for.
Clear and concise in what you're looking for.
Yes, in terms of what types of roles, even if you have target companies, it would be very helpful. People generally you're going to find are really helpful. They really want to help you, but don't just say, I'm not sure. I'm looking for something in technology. Like, show them that you've taken the time to really think about what it is that you're looking for. In other words, do the hard work and do your homework. Okay, like that's number one, right? Number two, say please and thank you. Be respectful of people's time, like they're helping you, right? Number three, I often say you should always return a recruiter's a phone call, because if you think about what we do for a living, we're the bearer of good news. Like, in other words, I have an opportunity. If it's not for you, you may be able to help somebody in your network. But if not that, I might have 10 people, 10 minutes that I sort of figure out, well, what have you been up to? Like that type of stuff. Like, give me a sense of what you might be looking for. And so, I get lots of executives, because I really work at the VP, C-level, board level. But, I get some executives when I talk to them about, okay, so what's your search strategy? I don't know. I said, well, have you done any job interviews? Well, no, I don't. Do you not return calls? Well, I've just been really busy at work. I never did.
I can't tell you how many people I talk to that don't return those calls from the recruiters or reach out or do any kind of networking with them until they're out of work and they need them.
Yes, exactly. And this is where I love to say something. True networking, Brian, it's not about me. It's about how can I help you? And networking is not just for jobs. Networking is for life. That is the biggest mistake people make. They think it's only for a job. But think about it. If you're a parent and you're asking someone which school or which daycare program are you doing, that's networking. Right? You're asking someone for their opinion. So true networking, it's not about me. It's about how can I help you? It's the sharing of information, in a reciprocal manner. And that's the biggest thing that people have to learn. That's why sometimes when I say to people, what is it about networking you don't like? And I feel like I'm begging. And I said, no, you've got it all wrong. It's all about how can I help you? And the people remember you for that. And also remember that it is for life. I've helped many young kids, like my friends' kids, land their first job. I said, for your first job, you might need your parents' help or your friends' help. But then after that, if you listen to me, I did a podcast on strategic networking, by the way. That was done about 2 years ago with Dr. Andrea Wadinki. She's played it again. It's ranked as one of the top 10 podcasts that she's ever had out of 136, by the way. And I talked about how do you strategically network, right? And so I was going to say to you that with these friends' kids, that's that first job I've helped them, and then I've taught them. You go out to networking events, you go help others. Your next job would be through your network or an old boss, you know what I mean, or whatever. And people have to really understand it's not just for jobs. It's for the best daycare, who's the best plumber, what area. It's that sharing of information. It is not just tied to job search.
So networking is more about what you can do for other people initially, rather than what you can do for yourself. And I noticed that you did this job seekers boot camp as well, where you talk about networking strategy as the number one issue. I think the other thing about networking that is key to me, and I think the reciprocity involved in networking is key. But I also think the other thing about it is that too many people do the 30-second exchange a business card, when really what you should be trying to do is get to know people. And you can't get to know someone and make hopefully a positive impression in 30 seconds. You should be prepared for that with your elevator pitch that you described earlier. But to really get to know someone, you've got to spend a little bit more time. And if you're only spending 30 seconds, at least in my experience, when someone spends 30 seconds with me, it feels transactional. I feel like I'm being used. I feel like I got to wash my hands after I shook that person's hand. I interviewed one person who said that their attitude toward networking was, I want to go look for a new friend and wonder who's my new friend of the day. And I think that's a far more positive attitude.
It is. And don't you hate the ones who actually shake your hand and then their head is moving back and forth to see who else is in the room? That's a very frustrating point too, right? When that happens. So I have a comment on that. When you're networking, you're at events. So I often tell people, I love going to conferences, but what I love about the conferences are the cocktail hours. Because in the cocktail hours, in that hour, either before an award ceremony or before a conference, or that cocktail hour is really critical because everyone who's there, you can approach. They're all there to quote network, right? And so you're better to have 3 to 4 deep, meaningful conversations than to have a whole bunch of collecting business cards. And frankly, nowadays, don't even bother collecting the business cards. What do you do with them? You take them home, they sit in your desk and they go nowhere. I don't know if you're aware, but on the LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn, okay? Like it's really made networking even simpler. So on your phone, there's a code and a QR code, and you can actually just exchange and you get LinkedIn together. So right, and then what I do is that night I'll go, great meeting you at an event. So there, that record is right there, on the record. So then next time I meet Brian Crombie, I look him up at LinkedIn and I go, oh, Brian, it was great meeting you at that, medic conference, you know what I mean? Or bio conference. It's right there. And then you don't have to enter a business card. And the beauty about that too, Brian, is once I've linked in with you, then when you're doing your updates and your podcasts, I'm still in touch with you, right?
No
like I'm being updated. So forget about the business cards. I don't even carry business cards anymore.
I still carry business cards, and I had an interesting experience recently on an airplane where I ended up having a really quite good conversation with someone who I thought that was a potentiality that we could do business later on. And she was interesting. She took her business card and she wrote on the back of it, where we met and what we discussed, which I thought was really powerful because, I may not have remembered all of that. Before we had gotten to the gate, she had already networked with me on LinkedIn and asked for a connection. And then within, probably the next day, she had sent an email following up saying it was a pleasure to meet and following up on some of the things that we had talked about. I used to work, as I mentioned, for Jim Pattison, and he had a rule: every phone call, every email gets responded to within 48 hours. He says, you don't have to necessarily do business with a person, and you can say, no, we're not interested in whatever it is that you're selling or pitching or doing or whatnot. But every single response, every single inquiry needed to be responded to within 48 hours. And so I do think responsiveness is key as well.
I totally agree. And it actually differentiates you. I've had some people do handwritten thank you notes.
Right? I think that's really powerful.
Which is pretty powerful too. And it's really memorable. And what you just said, exactly. I totally agree. I used to do that. I used to take the business cards and I would write stuff, you know what I mean? Right in the back of how I met them. But what I love about the LinkedIn is they're already linked in with me. And then I write what I usually wrote in the back of the business card, I put right into LinkedIn. And so it's right there for me. So if every time I walk in, one of the things, Brian, that I often find interesting is we do what we call general interviews. So these are people who are looking for a role, but I don't have a specific mandate. And the first question I ask, and it's very telling, is that not sure how much you know about me. And people will actually say, well, actually I know nothing. Can you, share with me your background? I said, oh, so you're here to learn about job search. Number one, you set up that waiting room. You could have looked me up on LinkedIn. You could have seen how many mutual connections we were. You could have figured out my background in less than 30 seconds and said, hey, I see that we have so-and-so, so-and-so. So when someone comes in that way, I know it's probably not going to be a great conversation because they've done nothing. That's almost, in my opinion, it's almost a lack of respect of people's time, that you didn't even take that initiative because you're asking for time, right? You know what I mean? In terms of a general search strategy. So that's why the power of LinkedIn is so fabulous, because if you can keep constantly using it and not being like, after this call, Brian, I'm going to go on LinkedIn. I'm going to say, Brian, thank you so much for the opportunity of being on your podcast, right?
Well, and that's thank you to you.
Yes. So I just think that people really need to be aware of this.
So we have 367 mutual connections.
Oh my gosh, that is
bad?
Amazing. That is amazing. Wow.
Is that good or bad?
That's incredible. That's probably one of the highest. I think that's probably the highest that I've ever had in terms of mutual connections.
So we're both super connectors, I guess.
Yes, we are.
I got to ask you about another post before we take a break that I found really kind of interesting, because one of the things that's interesting about LinkedIn is you get a sense of someone from a professional standpoint, but sometimes you also get a sense of someone from a personal standpoint. And you posted about the power of cold plunges. Tell me about the power of cold plunges and why you're into that.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, if you do all the studies and everything else, they say that when you take a cold plunge, it's actually really healthy for you. It boosts your immune system. It raises your brain power. Tony Robbins is a big proponent of it. I like to follow him. And, if you go along the beaches, if you're in Toronto, you'll see a bunch of people doing it in the wintertime. And
Cold
I
plunging.
actually, and if you go to Scandinavian
And are you one of them?
No, I'm not. I'm still working on it. But if you read the statistics in all sincerity, there's a lot of scientific support for it. And I mean, it's not any different. And it's also very good for immune system, anti-inflammatory. I mean, you even see athletes jumping into ice cold baths, right? That's more to get rid of the lactic acid.
Makes you unique too, I guess.
Yes.
Fantastic. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Sharon Mah-Gin, an executive search expert, a recruiter, because I think a lot of people right now in the doldrums of August and the summer are thinking about, what, am I happy in my current job? Am I happy in my current career? Should I be looking? And what I think Sharon is saying is now's a pretty good time to start thinking about updating your LinkedIn, updating your resume, and thinking about what you want to do long term. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our topic tonight is looking for a new job, looking for a new career, getting ready for the fall season, back to school, and is that something that we should be thinking about our future in regards to? Our guest is Sharon Mah-Gin. She's an executive search consultant. She's an expert. She's someone who worked for Newer Shoes with Korn Ferry, and now she's on her own. She specializes in healthcare and communications and other areas. And she talks about her superpower is elevating people. Seriously? Your superpower is elevating people?
Yes. And you're probably going to ask me, what exactly does that mean, right?
Yes.
Yes, I know. Dr. Andrew Wojcinski also talks about it. What I mean by that is I can see talents in people that sometimes they don't see themselves. I can talk about numerous examples where I've gone to a candidate for a search and they said, I'm not interested. And then I go, I think the cultural fit. We talked earlier about cultural fit being number one. Yeah. And then thinking, you know what? I think the cultural fit is there. I need you to go and meet this person. And then before we know it, we're at the offer stage and acceptance stage. Right. So I could easily have just said, thank you very much. You're not interested. I'll move on to the next candidate. Right. So when I talk about elevating people, it is that ability, honestly, to be able to see people where I just go, he or she or they are in the right fit for this particular role. That's what I mean when I talk about that. And also the fact is, I like to be generous with your time and to help others. And so there are many people that I have given referrals to. There are many people who I've coached and mentored and helped them in their careers just because it was the right thing to do. I'm not talking about any money. I'm not talking about, expecting anything in return, because true strategic networking is also helping others and being generous and expecting nothing in return.
One of the best,
and the universe figures it out.
One of the best networkers I've ever met is a friend of mine by the name of Howard Brown. And he is a super connector, an incredible networker. And what he does is he introduces people to other people all the time and gives everyone an incredibly short, succinct, and accurate resume outline when he makes that introduction, such that he makes relevant connections. And he gets it all back in spades. And he doesn't ask for it back, but he does get it back because, he ends up introducing people. I ended up being at a seminar once where someone said one of the most powerful things you could do at a cocktail party is ask the people, is there someone here that you're looking for that I can introduce you to? Can I help you make an introduction to somebody? It was interesting. You commented on your LinkedIn about a Harvard study that said, stop asking how you are. Harvard researchers say this is what successful people do when making small talk, which is they don't ask how you are or what you do, but they ask follow-on questions that are far more in-depth. And so they make the small talk far more relevant. I found that interesting.
It is, and Brian, one of the things I would add is that when you're at a networking event and it really is not about you. Like, for example, if I met you, Brian, and I just sort of said, hi, Brian, nice shirt. You're being, what a beautiful green, and you'd probably say, thank you. And I go, oh, were you golfing by any chance? Because, today's a beautiful day to golf. And you might say, you were, and I go, oh, well, where were you golfing? And then you might say it's a charity golf thing. And maybe 3 questions. And I say, oh, sorry, Brian, I got to run. My friend is here. If someone came up to you and said, Brian, what do you think of Sharon Mah-Gin? You would just say, okay, well, she was great. And yet, if you watch the video, I never once spoke about myself. Yeah. And it goes back to what I often said that, Oprah Winfrey, in her last show, I don't know if you had a chance to catch it, but in her last show, I think she mentioned something about, I've interviewed over 26,000 people, including convicts to royalty, etc. And what is the one thing that every single person wants? Do you want to guess?
Be relevant.
Yes. Or the way she said it is I see you, I hear you, and what you say matters. It's the same thing as Dale Carnegie. He talks about, that book, how to connect with people. That is such a timeless book, but it's all the same thing, that example. In other words, people love to talk about themselves. So take an interest and they'll remember you more if you talk about yourself. People love talking about themselves. And then they may ask you what you do, they may not, but it doesn't matter, because when you build that relationship, eventually they'll come back and ask you, oh, but by the way, what do you do? But then you took the initiative and asked about themselves.
You also posted an interesting article about how to introduce yourself. And it had 3 parts to it, to talk about the present, talk about the past, and talk about the future.
Correct.
Why is that?
Okay, well, actually, I can't take credit for that. That's by Dr. Andrea Wojcicki. She is a phenomenal woman that I highly recommend if you need help on personal branding. But she actually wrote that article, and it was published in Harvard Business School. She herself is a Harvard graduate, PhD in communications. Taught in terms of personal communications one-on-one. You might actually want to interview her for one of your podcasts. She does podcasts herself.
Introduce me to her.
Yes, I absolutely will be happy to. I can't take credit for that. That's really hers, but basically past, present, and future. It's a 1-pager. It's Harvard published. If you go to her podcast, Talk About Talk, she'll explain it in much more detail, but it's just the order and how you introduce yourself.
It's interesting because she does talk about you want to say what you're currently doing,
correct,
what your background experience is, and most importantly, what you're looking forward to doing in the future.
Correct.
Makes a lot of sense.
Right. And that's what a lot of people don't do. They'll talk about only what they want to do. Like they'll say, I'm currently, a COO or CFO at a company and stuff. And then they leave you hanging. Right. Like they don't say that what I'm looking for is another role, ideally in technology, ideally with these target companies. And then, so the past, the present, the future. Yes.
You also posted about, respect and 5 simple ways to show respect. I guess you don't think that people show respect often enough in the interview process. And I'll repeat these for you if you're interested. 1,
yes,
be generous.
Can you repeat them for me?
Be generous. Be a giver, not a taker. 2, be prepared, even for informational interviews. 3, say thank you. Always follow up with a thank you. 4, make it easy. Be specific about what you want. And number 5, keep it concise. Be precise and avoid writing long-winded emails.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all true. You couldn't have said it better.
Well, you said it, so I couldn't have said it better because I was repeating what you had said. And then you talked about kicking off a job search, which I guess is the real topic of tonight's conversation, because that's what we're talking about, whether people should be thinking about doing it. And we've talked about your number 1 point, which was develop your personal brand, which is articulate your unique superpowers and what makes you different. Your second,
positive, relevant, and unique, right?
Topical, relevant, and unique.
So positive, relevant, relevant, and unique.
Unique. Okay. Number 2 was identify your goals before you start your job search.
Yes.
What kind of position, what industry, and what kind of firm? Do people not typically do that?
They don't. A lot of them will come and just say, well, I'm thinking of, or, something in technology. And I'd say, well, what target companies? Oh, I haven't really thought about that. Or they don't finish how you introduce yourself, the present, the past, and the future.
And they don't network.
No, and they don't network. And then I ask them, what's your job search strategy? What have you done so far? And then they look at me, they go, well, have you gone out for any interviews? I think it was the CEO of Google who said, you always need to take an interview, even if you're not 100% interested, because otherwise, Brian, how do you know what your market value is? Right? Like, you know what I mean? And because you get some people, I'm not interested, etc. In retained search, which is what we do, we don't post our jobs anywhere. You will not find out about this role unless I contact you, someone from my team contacts you, or your network tells you.
That's interesting. I was told that something like over 95% of all jobs are on LinkedIn and Indeed these days. That's not true?
Maybe for the more junior levels, I would agree with that 100%, but not at the executive level, not at the VP, C level, well, maybe some of the VP, but not at the C level and board level.
So that says you've got to be in contact with some people like yourself and making sure that people like you have their resumes and
that's right.
And know that you're currently doing a COO role and a CFO job. So people are up to date. Right.
Yeah. So we don't post our jobs anywhere.
The third was optimize your LinkedIn profile. And so I guess that is, you say the first place recruiters look.
Yes.
So you make it up to date and complete. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think a lot of people update their LinkedIn profile. How often should you do that?
In my humble opinion, every time there's a major job change, for obviously, right? Or if you are in the job market, you should definitely, and the key too is also have the right keywords, right, in your LinkedIn so you can be found.
Are there other things?
There's a key accomplishment, update it. The beauty about LinkedIn is that it allows you to be a little bit more personal. In the about section, it allows you to talk a little bit more on a personal basis. A resume is more business, is what you and I grew up with, Brian, like, you know what I mean? It's more like a chronological history. In LinkedIn, your personality can come a little bit more in terms of what you post, right? In terms of how you respond, in terms of your about section, you can talk about other interests. It does allow your personality to come out a little bit more. And I actually think it's not even updating. I think that you should try to be interactive in terms of posting some stuff, reacting to things. Like, in other words, keep a dialogue going.
I think that's really important. And that's something that not a lot of people do and not a lot of people mention. But that interaction ends up being so critically important. And I'll give you one example. I find that, I post all of my interviews on LinkedIn. And I get, supposedly based on the metrics, 20,000 people listening to my radio show on the radio.
Congratulations, Brian.
But then I get hundreds or thousands more people watching it on YouTube and LinkedIn and things like that. And number one, obviously, it's got to be an interesting guest and an interesting topic. But what the guest does and what some of the guest contacts do and I've had some LinkedIn things go up into the thousands and 5,000, 10,000. And that's when the guest will either share or comment, and then one or two or three other people comment. And whether it's the algorithm that captures something that is more interesting to the general society because it's got some contacts, or whether it just spreads it to more people because of the comments. But if you start making something a little bit viral, it can go a lot more viral. And so I tell all of my interviewees, if they want to get their message out there, comment on it, and then get one other, two, three other people to comment on it, and then it goes crazy. And if it works for me for a radio broadcast, it's got to work in spades for a post that anyone else might want to post about some topic that's important to them.
Right. Well, and I can repost it too, right? I can take this and repost it to my whole network, which, as you can imagine, is quite extensive.
What I'm saying is that repost is important, but what's equally important is if you or I or someone that we two know comments on it, then that comment, that interaction ends up being really critically important. And so many people, and that's why we call it social media. They think of it just as broadcast media. They just read what they are sent, but when they comment on it, it makes it so much more powerful.
Absolutely. And that's probably, you've seen that firsthand. You've seen that I comment on certain things.
You comment on a lot and you congratulate people a lot. I've noticed a ton of your congratulations on your LinkedIn.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy for them. They're usually people that I know.
And probably that you recruited.
Yes, exactly.
Or you tried to recruit.
You got it. Exactly.
This is really fascinating. So do you think a lot of people are sitting back in August on the beach or wherever they are in the campsite or the cottage thinking about their futures? And how do they go about setting those goals if they don't really know what it is they want to do? How do they do that?
They can work with a career coach. They can work with they can just put down what are the things that I've really loved about my last jobs, what are the things that I don't like to do, where is it that I want to go in terms of where do I want to be in 2 years, 5 years. The last 2 weeks of August, I find everybody's on vacation. You've got university kids, you're getting them set up. You've got youngsters, they finish their summer jobs. Like that last 2 weeks of August, I've consistently found everyone is practically on vacation. And then they're just clearing their head. And then September, the kids get settled, university, preschool, high school, public school, private school. And then you can really see that mid-September, things start to settle down and everyone gets back to work, for lack of a better word. And it's going to be really interesting because I was just told recently, for example, that one of the large companies, I heard that Rogers is now compelling everybody to be back at work in September, no matter what level, 3 days a week. You know what I mean? Like I think this September, Brian, is going to be really unique post-COVID. Like a lot of companies now are taking a stronger stance that you can't work from home anymore, etc. And everyone is going back into the office.
But are they going back full-time or just 3 days a week?
3 days a week, from what I can see.
So people
most have gone to a hybrid, but they're not allowing that you can just work from home.
I'm finding that there's still employees that are making decisions on where they want to go based on whether there is a hybrid opportunity or full-time, or whether it's full-time in the office. People don't want to work full-time in the office. You're
exactly right. But they are now compelling people, like some of the larger companies. I just heard recently Rogers is, saying that 3 days a week. You've got to have special exception in order for that to happen. So someone just told me that just today, actually. So I found that interesting. So anyway, but my point is that after you get past the summer, we'll start to get the call of people thinking about what it is they want to do. Now, if you're in financial services, you're going to wait because the bonuses pay out in October, right? But other industries, they start to reflect about, and usually the reasons are limited growth opportunities, relocation required. I want to be promoted quicker. Don't like the boss. Not the right culture. I want to work hybrid, not allowing me to work hybrid. I'm seeing that now, even, which is interesting. So I found that interesting that they're going, no, I don't want to do it anymore because I want to be able to work fully offsite, not hybrid.
Well,
so that's why I'm looking.
Some people have enjoyed this digital nomad existence and want to continue it. Other people want the opposite. They're tired of spending their whole lives in their small condominium and want to actually get back to interacting with people. Whenever I'm downtown Toronto and I'm walking through the concourse or along Bay Street or King Street, I always bump into people that I know and that I probably should have reached out and talked to. And the fact is, by colliding into them, you end up remembering that you should have talked to them and you've got some business opportunity you can share with them or a drink that you should have with them, etc. I miss that because there's just not as many opportunities to do that anymore. And when I'm down there, there aren't as many people on the sidewalks or in the concourse. So it's, I think that kind of interaction is key. And one of the suggestions that someone made to me at one point in time about LinkedIn and conferences or networking events that we talked about earlier, you talked about how you love the cocktail party, was find out who's going to an event before time. Look them up on LinkedIn, and for a few people, say and reach out to them saying, looking forward to chatting with you about blah, 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 whatever the topic is, but really wanting to make sure that there's a couple of people that you're looking for and that are hopefully looking for you so that then you can make those connections rather than it just being a shot in the dark to see if you run into someone interesting and helpful.
Yeah, I constantly do that, Brian. And even when you're invited to a table, a business dinner, and there's 10 people at the table, I've taught many people from a coaching perspective, send the guest list ahead of time to the people. So because there's nothing worse than you're sitting halfway across the table, the table tell, oh yeah, you're Brian Crombie. I'm not going to get much time. So I've encouraged a lot, and I ask it even as a guest, send out looking forward to hosting you tonight. Here is your table setting. name, and you could and company. Ideally, you don't have to put titles, you know, but just even the name and company, so you can easily. Then what I often do is I take that list and I actually link in with them, and like, I'm really looking forward to seeing you at dinner tonight.
And I check them out to see if there's a topic that I want to discuss with them. We're chatting with
Bingo.
Sharon Mah-Gin, an executive recruiter tonight. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about getting ready for looking for a new career, a new job in the fall, if you're interested in it. And I think one of the lessons that Sharon Mah-Gin, our executive recruiter expert guest tonight, has told us about is you should be thinking about things and looking about things, even if you're not actively looking, because her comment was, how do you know your market value if you're not? And I think, you know, one of the other comments people have often made is if you're going to be networking at some point in time in the future, you got to be networking with people and making contacts with people ahead of time. Otherwise, it's going to feel too transactional. It's going to feel like you're just there because you need a job, or you want the connection, you want the sale, rather than you really want to get to know people and help people. And so network before you need to network. Think about your job career before you absolutely need to think about your job career. And then I liked also Sharon's advice that, and if you lose your job in the summertime, just take the summer off and start in the fall. But there's been a bunch of other things, Sharon, that you've talked about, and I really liked your comment about personal branding. And what were the 3 words you used to describe personal branding?
Positive, relevant, and unique.
Positive, relevant, and unique, which is pretty similar to sort of the unique selling proposition that we learned in Marketing 101 that every product has to have. And so I thought that was really helpful. We talked about, updating your LinkedIn profile and that how people don't do that often enough. We talked about how you can network through LinkedIn. We talked about how you should be making connections with recruiters, and if a recruiter calls, take that call and respond, and don't be the person who doesn't want to talk to that recruiter until you actually need that recruiter later on. We talked, I think, a lot about your resume and keywords, both in your resume and in LinkedIn. I presume that applies to cover letters as well, but making it personal, making it relevant, having action-oriented, accomplishment-oriented descriptions in your LinkedIn profile, in your resume, in your cover letter, etc. And I think a lot of this comes down to figuring out who you are, what you want to do, and what companies that you can join where you can actually contribute. Because if you can't contribute and improve the company's performance, you talked about fit being so critically important, but if you actually can't fit in and then hopefully do something positive to have a positive impact on the company, why would you want to join the company?
Right, exactly.
You're just going to be a cog in the wheel. No one wants to just be a cog in the wheel.
Exactly.
You want to be relevant. You want to have an impact.
Yes, absolutely. Every executive I talk to, whether it be at a board level or C-level, it's all about why you're interested in the opportunity, because I feel I can leverage off my experience and really make an impact in either people leadership, bottom line, cost efficiencies, M&A activity, capital raising, etc.
So I think, Sharon, this has been a really helpful conversation. I guess a couple of things come out of this. Number one, I think all of us in the next couple of weeks, whether we're looking for a job or not, should be thinking about updating our LinkedIn profile. We should be thinking about our personal brand and making it positive, relevant, and unique.
Yes.
I think we should be thinking about our goals, because one of the things that you said on numerous occasions was you got to have some goals and think about what you want to achieve in life. And then I think we should be sending out a couple of LinkedIn requests or LinkedIn connections with recruiters that we know or recruiters that we want to know, just reminding them about who we are and what we're doing.
Right. And because overlaying all of that is networking, right? It's the sharing of information. So perhaps if you don't know what your goals are, it might be start with your passion. So for example, maybe you're interested in the travel industry, then go talk to a senior executive in the travel industry, right? But that's networking again, right? So I think overlaying everything that we've talked about is that networking is not just for jobs. Networking is for life, where it could help you in terms of figuring out your personal goals. It can also, I'm a CA by background, and I ended up going into recruiting, because what I quickly learned is what I didn't want to do, and that was to be a CA or CPA. And I met a wonderful woman. She's retired now. Susan Larkin is her name, actually, from the Atlantic Group. I love calling her out. And she was amazing. And she had a regulatory reporting job at the Bank of Montreal. And I said, "Ooh, not for me." And she's the one that said, "Sharon, have you ever considered executive search?" Which I had never done. And I thank her to this day, like, you know what I mean, that she's the one that helped me pivot my career from being an accountant into recruiting and slash executive search.
And your special sauce, your superpower, is helping elevate people.
Correct.
What a great thing to be able to say about, your life, that you've elevated people and you've helped them be more successful and grow and elevated from where they otherwise would have been.
It goes back to being generous, being kind. I mean, just being helpful. And it goes back to what I said earlier. True networking is not about you. It's about how can I help you? The sharing of mutual information in a reciprocal, not to be confused with scorekeeping, but in a reciprocal manner. There has to be some give and take.
Sharon Mah-Gin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If people are interested in our conversation, want to contact you, do you want them to go to your website? Do you want them to try to link in with you? What should people do that think that you're the recruiter that should help them?
Yes. You know what? Linking in would probably be the easiest way. So it's Sharon Mah-Gin. I'm the only person with that name. So it makes it easy.
Sharon Mah-Gin, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I remind you, I'm on every night, Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videocasts are available. Videos on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and the podcasts on Apple, Audible, Speakeasy, SoundCloud, etc. So check me out. And check me out on LinkedIn as well, and connect up with me as well if you're interested. Thanks, Sharon. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you.